Hey, this is Brandon with Tech Step Academy, and today we're moving forward with kind of a deeper exercise in how to find elements so that we can prepare and execute our automation quickly and effectively. So to help with that task, I've got two windows up, as you can tell. One is going to be a browser window where we're going to talk about searching for elements and how to do that, again, effectively and quickly. And I've got a window up to track those elements that we find, so that I can use them for automation. So real quick, again, whatever IDE you want to use or wherever you like to write your code, that's fine. I'm going to be using PyCharm today. So I'm going to create a Python file. We'll call this element exercise. And I'm just going to leave that blank for now. And we're going to open up a browser window as well. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to go to a training ground that I've created for you. It's very basic. So we're going to go to techstepacademy.com and training dash as in hyphen ground. So again, techstepacademy.com/training hyphen ground. And that takes us to our training ground. So all this is you'll notice this is an extremely ugly, very basic HTML page, and that's by design. I don't want a lot of distractions or noise when we're trying to do this. I want you to see at the most basic level what to focus on and how to find what you need. Because once you can do that, it doesn't matter how many things, how many elements you have on a page. You can really hone in and get to what you need just using the tools that we've been using so far. So you can see not only how to manipulate those elements, but also how to validate them, right? Which is really at the core of what automated testing is. You're not only clicking on things and navigating places, you're also extracting data and validating that data. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I would like to do on this page is enter in some text into the first input field. So you can see here we have an input field, right? So we see a smattering of some elements. I want to go ahead and break into the source using the inspect dev tools that we used earlier. And we can do that by right-clicking on the element we want to see and clicking inspect. So again, if you recall our last session, you can kind of hover up and down and highlight different things as this begins to display sort of what builds this page. What are the foundational elements of this page? We've got a label here, which tells us that's the input field, right? And then we've got a button under that, button 1. We see the name over here. That button is input 1, right? Which is actually that's the input name, rather, of that input is input 1, which makes sense. And we've got a button down here, which again, you can see that it's going to highlight here as I hover over it, which is very helpful. All right. So I see that has a name of BUTN1, button 1, and it has an ID as well. And apparently when we click on it, it's supposed to do something. We see it's going to call some script and pass it some text. So we'll worry about that later. But again, just to drive this home, you should work on getting comfortable with these elements. And these dev tools here. Because, and again, this is the same in Chrome and Firefox. You can do this by right-clicking and clicking on Inspect. So once you are more familiar with what this hierarchy looks like in the DOM, you become more effective at teasing out the things that you want. So as an example, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to put some text into an input field, which we did last time. So that should be fairly easy. We're going to click on a button. And in addition to that, I'm going to show you some advanced ways of navigating this hierarchy, because sometimes it's not as easy as it looks. There's a couple gotchas, and we'll go over that very quickly. So let's go over the stuff that we should know first, and that is filling out that input field and clicking on that button. So I don't want to rehash too much what we did in the last video, so I'm going to move kind of quickly here. I'm going to show you sort of how if we're trying to tackle this page, if this is a new page that we're going to automate against, then one of the first things you can do is start to break that page apart into the pieces you care about. So based on our goal, which as I said was to input some text, to click a button, and we're also going to maybe find one of these prices, that means that I am going to start to break this page into those pieces that I care about. And that's going to be, well, the input fields, the button, and the price. And we're going to do that by, again, bringing up this inspection window. And right off the bat, I know, okay, as far as the things I want to manipulate, input is one of them. So let's go ahead and let's see how we might find this element, right? Now, before you saw me do that in Python, right? We invoked a WebDriver and we used find element by CSS selector, things like that. I'm going to show you a quicker way to validate your, we call them locators, right? The way that you find that element. I'm going to show you how to prove that those work before we even touch Python, because nothing is more frustrating than trying to do it through Python code and trial and error, and you're opening up browsers and it just takes a long time. I'm going to show you the quick, efficient, competent way of doing that. So before we ever open up Python, really, we can use what's called the console. Again, both Chrome and Firefox have this. It's a fantastic way to programmatically move around your, what we call the DOM, again, your web page. And without getting too technical, let me just give you an example. So I mentioned in the last tutorial that we used CSS selectors to find the elements that we were looking for. That's only one method of several that we can find these elements. The other is called XPath, right? And this is something that it's worth doing some extra research on your own, but CSS selectors are one method of giving that browser the information that it needs to go find that element. It's got one set of syntax that you saw in the last tutorial. XPath has a slightly different set of syntax, and it has a slightly different way of looking for those elements. They have differing levels of efficiency in different scenarios. What you really need to just keep in mind is think about the context in which you're using it. And as you move forward and get more confident with this, that will start to become up. So if you ever run into people that say XPath is bad, never use it, that's not the case. There are some cases in context where XPath is actually very useful and very readable. It can get in there surgically and find those elements that you want. I'm going to give you one of them. I'm going to use a CSS selector, and I'm going to show you how to validate that before we even get into Python. So we do that here in the console. You should get used to these two views here. We've got elements and console. These are where you're going to spend most of your time as a front-end automator. So why don't I find that input field? And just to make it a little more complex, I'll find the second one, right? So we have, here's the other one, input field 2. Again, the quicker way would just be to inspect it. Boom. Okay, so building off of last session, how would I best find or describe this element? I know it's an input, right? So which one of these would I use? Well, they're both pretty unique, right? They both look pretty unique. I could probably use either one. For today, because we used name last time, I'm going to go ahead and use ID this time, IPT2. That looks very unique. And again, I'm not going to get into Python yet. What I'm going to do is track, when we find a locator that works, I will go ahead and write that down because I'm going to use it later. But for now, we're going to switch over to the console and we're going to give it a try. So here's the cool stuff, right? Here's the secret sauce. The quick way to validate whether or not your locator works is if you are using a CSS selector in your console, in the dev tools of your browser, you can do something that looks like this. So that's a $, open and close parentheses. Looks like complete nonsense, right? So all this is you are saying, okay, I'm about to give you a CSS selector, and when I hit enter, you're going to tell me whether or not that matches anything. That's all you need to know at this point. So if you're using a CSS selector, it is $, and then whatever you put in the parentheses is going to be that CSS selector. So we're going to use quotes. And again, based off, again, if we're going to use a CSS selector, then I know it's what type of element. Let's look again. It's an input, right? So if we're a detective and we're asking someone, have you seen this element, right? We give them the picture and we say, all right, it's a type of input, right? So then they say, well, what type of input? Like, give me some more information. I need more information to find. There's a lot of inputs, right? There's at least 2 on this page. At which point you would say, well, okay, let's go back. It has an ID of IPT2. And the other one has a different ID, so I know that I could, with confidence, use that ID and know that it should get me the right one, right? And just to drive that home, if I give it a CSS selector of input, well, it gives me 2, right? There's 2 inputs. And if you break that open here, right, and I hover over each of these indexes here, you see, oh, here's the 2 inputs. And notice up here, you should see that highlight changing. That is showing me, oh, well, that CSS selector you gave me, it found an input, but it found all inputs, right? Because I didn't give it any other information. So that's okay. Let's just hit up to get back to where we were, and let's build on that a little bit. Let's describe that input a little better. How do we describe an element when using a CSS selector? If you recall, we use square brackets, right? That, in my opinion, is the most readable way, especially for beginners. And again, there are other ways to do this, more advanced ways with CSS Selector. I'm going to let you research those on your own. I don't find them as readable, so I'm going to stick with this method for consistency. And I think it'll be easier for you to learn this way. So again, we're describing this input. I said today we weren't using name, we were going to use what? We're going to use the ID, right? And this ID, just to avoid typing it in and making a mistake, I'm going to go ahead and Control-C, copy it. And ID equals, now again, we're giving it a string, and I can't use double quotes because I've already opened it with double quotes and that would break it. I know I keep saying that, but it's very important. So I'm going to use single quotes. IPT2. So my hope is that this should describe a single input. Now remember, when I did it in Python, I would have to run the Python program, it would open the browser, it would try it, and if it didn't work, it would blow up and it would waste a lot of our time. You can see here this is much quicker. Here we go. It found one, and only one. If I break it open, there's only one index, 0, and when I hover, it finds the one that we want, which is, again, that second input. Perfect. Well, so here's what this looks like in practice. We said, okay, that gets us the input we want, and that is a CSS selector. That CSS selector is absolutely valid to use in Python. So let's go over here. And let's say, okay, input 1 equals, well, what are we giving it? We're giving it a locator, right? Oh, that didn't work. I didn't copy it correctly. I'm going to highlight it again, just to be explicit. Copy that sucker, right? And paste it. Okay. Now, to avoid running into the problem with this single quotes here, I should probably use double quotes. There we go. That looks nice. And again, if I want to validate this, let's say I wrote it in Python and I want to make sure it works, just copy it. Again, $$. And let's feed it to the browser and see if it likes it, right? And it does. So that's how we know, all right, this is a good locator. Let's keep that there. And next I know I want to manipulate a button, I said, right? So let's try maybe button 4. So that automatically kicks us right over to the Elements tab here, right? And I see some information about that element. So type button, right? So I know when I go and I start asking about that element, when I start to find it, I know I'm going to ask for a button. It has a name, it has an ID, and it does some stuff, right? When I click on it, it's got some text in it too, which could be of use to us later, but for now I just want to find it. So why don't we again use the ID, B4, seems fairly unique. So before I do anything over here, I'll go ahead and give the variable. And I made a mistake here. I called this input 1. It's really input 2, right? As evidenced by the fact that it's called input 2. That's my mistake. So this is button 4, right? So button 4 locator, what does it look like? Well, we have to test it. So again, over to the console, and I'm going to go ahead and click this to clear it so we can get a fresh start here. Now, for this one, I'm going to use an XPath, just so I can show you sort of what the slight differences are. An XPath, again, has a slightly different syntax, and when you're asking the console in the browser to find an XPath, there is a slightly different way that you tell it that. So rather than $$, to use an XPath, it is $X for XPath, and the same parentheses, okay? This one is going to bite you if you don't memorize it early. So you'll be kicking around trying to find the element and pulling your hair out. So just make sure you remember $$, that's a CSS selector. $, kind of looks like an S. Maybe that helps you, I don't know, for CSS. $X for XPath is going to get you the XPath. So here's what it looks like when I find a button element using the XPath. Instead of just typing button here, you'll notice if I try this, previously if I tried this, it would get me both buttons, right? Or all buttons on the page. You'll notice that it doesn't find anything. But we know that there are 4 buttons there. And this is where it can get frustrating if you don't remember the syntax correctly. So for an XPath, you have to tell it where to start. Whether you're starting at the root of the hierarchy, the root of that document, or if you're diving into the middle surgically to find the element that you want, which is what we're going to do. So if I tell it, okay, / button, right, which is just telling it, all right, at some point in this hierarchy, I want you to look for a button, right, anywhere in that hierarchy. Now we have some success. We say, okay, well, you told me you wanted a button. I found 4 of them, right? Which one do you want? I can highlight these. You can see them. So again, it's the same output you would get with the CSS selector. It's just we found it in a different way. That's all it is. There's just 2 different ways to find the elements, right? So I need to give it more information. Thankfully, giving it more information using an XPath is pretty similar to doing it in a CSS selector, with some very important differences. So we said they had an ID, right? Let's go take a look. So I see it has an ID of B4. Let's go ahead and use that. So I will copy it. And in an XPath, I can't do what I did in CSS selector where I go, oh, just, give me the ID. That's not the context or not the syntax that works. What you can do is tack on an @ symbol and say, all right, @ID equals whatever the ID is, right? So anytime you give it an attribute of that element in an XPath, you use the @ symbol. So I don't expect you to remember this or memorize it right now, but as we move forward, that's something you should practice a couple times and get used to. Just get used to the 2 different methods of describing things, both CSS selector and XPath, because those are the 2 primary ways of finding elements. So again, what was that ID again? I copied it, B4, right? So I expect this to find the one that I care about. And we had some luck. Let's crack it open, take a look. Okay, and it highlights the button that I want. So again, we know that if I'm using an XPath, that is a valid locator for that element. So let's go ahead and let's take it. So you see what we're doing here, right? What we're doing is we're testing these very quickly without using any Python code. And then once we find one that works, we find a good formula, boom, we pop it into Python, and we never need to troubleshoot it in Python, right? Now you'll notice if I paste this here, this is probably not a good idea because I'm not giving myself any indication that this is actually a CSS selector. So I need to use that when I actually start using Selenium, and this is an XPath. Now, I know just from looking at them, based on the syntax, but the person who reads my code later certainly may not. So why don't I maybe, I don't know, you don't have to use variables this long, but for clarity's sake today, why don't I do something like this? This would be the ham-fisted, beat you over the head with it, hey, this is a CSS selector, and this is an XPath, right? So whatever works. All right, so we found those 2 items, and we can manipulate those in Python, and I'll prove that in just a moment. But there is one more thing I want to cover, and that is moving up and down in a hierarchy when the situation requires that, right? And what I mean is, let's take a look at these prices down here. You see we have 2 products. We see that one product, product 1 has a price of $200, and product 2 has a price of $200. So how do I know if I look at the actual elements here? Let's say I want to get the price of product 2. That's what I'm looking for. That's my objective. So if I look in here and focus on these, what do they look like? Well, I'm going to open this up so you can see. I've got a div which contains all of the information for product 1, right? And it's got a class name called fake class. And I've got another div which covers all the information of product 2, which is also a type fake class. Now, here's where things start to get interesting. If my objective is I want to get the price of product 2, okay? Then, well, I know I could get the div, and then I could break that down and try to get at that product. But the problem is, as you can see here, someone, well, that someone being me, but a lot of times in production environments, you'll find very bad or no ID structures, right? Especially for divs. So this one is the exact same ID as this div has the same ID as this div right here. So we can't really find, we can't reliably find the right div using that method, right? I could find both divs and then say, oh, well, I'll just take the second one. But what if they move in the order, right? What if someone changes some code and now product 2 appears before product 1 or whatever? There's some times where those are created dynamically. So it's not reliable for us to go by, right? Oh, well, just get me the second one. We want to be more surgical than that. We want to be as 100% sure as we can that we're getting the right one. So using the div is out. We can't use the div to find that, right? So I'm going to demonstrate that. So again, I'm going to use an XPath just so you can get used to what it looks like. Let's look for the div. Say, okay, well, could we find it with a div? Right? Again, those 2 slashes and an XPath. Okay, all sorts of divs, right? So not only the 2 divs that I want, but a whole bunch of divs that are represents everything in this page. So that's basically out, right? Even if I inspect and I go to this div and I say, all right, well, give me a div of ID div1, right? So go ahead and give me the div that has an ID of div1. Well, we have 2. So that's not reliable. Like I can't with 100% certainty say, again, like, oh, just give me the second one. Because the order is not always the same, okay? Things change, and we want to avoid that. Because if you assume that this will always be here, then your test will break when it's not, and you've written brittle tests, which is going to waste your time later when you have to go back and fix them, or it's going to look like something is broken, and your test will fail, when really everything's fine, it's just your test was poorly written, right? So how can we get a crack at this? Well, if we look at the elements here, I see that under a div we have a span, and that seems to be the case for both of these, right? There's a span which has some text in it. The text is bolded. That's what the B here is. And we have product 1, and I'm going to crunch this down a little bit so we can see kind of the structure. So under the div we have a span, and right next to that span in the hierarchy at the same level is a paragraph, right? And the paragraph contains the price, which is what we want. So now I'm thinking, all right, well, I can't just look for P, right? Because if I look for P, if I say get me the, well, there's tons of those too, right? So that's not a good way to guarantee it. My thought then becomes, well, could I look for a div that has a paragraph under it? And the answer to that is yes, you absolutely can. That's a great way to describe an element, right? Well, what does he look like? Well, he's a div, and that div has a paragraph inside it, right? So we can find all the divs that have paragraphs under them in the hierarchy. And that would look something like, and this, I'm using XPath here because one of the strengths of XPath, and one of the contexts in which it's actually very useful, is when you need to move up and down in a hierarchy like this situation, where it's not, I can't just get in surgically and find one element using an ID. I've got to sort of jump around, right? I've got to find one unique point and then move up or move down or both. XPath is very good at that, and I'll show you why. So let me find a div that has a paragraph under it. Okay, a lot of them. So again, not very helpful. Oops, there we go. Well, actually that wasn't even accurate because, okay. So div paragraph is not going to get us there. So how can I do this? Well, is there anything unique about these two divs that I can use? So here's div 1, here's div 2. Well, they're both called div 1, but here's the first one and here's the second one. If we look at the spans, already really if you just look at the page, what is the one difference between these two? It's the product name, right? The product name is the only thing I can see that is different in here, and in the code as well. If I look down here, same class, same ID even on these divs, that's no help. In this case, the price is the same. That's no help either, right? But the product name is different. So in this situation, the product name is the most reliable thing we have to determine productness, right? Like, so the product and the price that we want. In this case, the only information we're given on the automation side, and sometimes this is very realistic. Developers don't always think about the automator, right, when they're writing their pages. So you might not get good IDs or good names. So doing some detective work, I can say, well, why don't we start with the product name and then try to find our way to that price that associates to that product name. So if that doesn't make sense, let me see if I can clarify it for you. So if we look at this hierarchy here again, we've got a div. Under that is a span, which contains that product name. You can see it highlighting it up here when I hover over it. And right next to that span in the hierarchy, not above it, not below it, right? It's on this exact same level of that hierarchy, is the paragraph that has the treasure, right? The stuff we want. Well, then my strategy could be, I could use the uniqueness of this product name to find this product and then maybe hop up a level, right? And then find the paragraph that is on the same level as that particular span, right? That particular product. Because I know that if I find product 1 and I go up a level, boom, which takes me to the span, and then, well, I can't go down to a paragraph if a paragraph is on the same level as the span. I'm going to have to go up again. So again, I know this is kind of hard to visualize, but just watch the mouse here. If I find this bold object here, this bold element, this product 1, using this unique name, and I hop up to span, that's not going to get me where I need to be. If I hop up twice and I end up at the div level, then I say, find me the paragraph that is under that div, which takes us here. I am very likely going to, well, not very likely, I will get the price that is associated with product 1. Does that make sense? Because if I search for product 1, I don't have to worry about it finding product 2 because product 2 doesn't match that name, right? So if I look for product 1, I'm going to start here and then I can say go up 1, boom, go up another one, boom. Now find me that paragraph that is under that div. So we're hopping around a little bit here, right? Sometimes you have to do that. In this case, that's the only way that I can find the price that is associated with that product. And that's where XPath is very useful, right? Now, the first thing you should do in this situation is probably go strangle the developer and say, hey, give me a better way to find that element. But 9 times out of 10, that was written a long time ago and no one's going to have the time to go back and fix it. So let's untangle this. And if that didn't make sense to you, that's okay. See if it makes sense as we unfold this, as we find this element, right? So I'm going to use XPath again. And I said that we needed to start at what level? The only thing that was unique was the product. The element that contains the product information is not the span. It's this bold tag here. So get me a bold tag. There are 2, right? We see them here. Well, then get me the one that has product 1 in it, right? So the way we do that in XPath, we can call a text function. You don't have to memorize this now. This is something that as you practice, you will recall. This is, again, something that XPath shines in. There is really no way to find an element by the text information of the element in CSS Selector. There just isn't, at least not at the time of this recording. If you need to find an element by the text that it contains, which by the way is not ideal, right? That's not the greatest, that's not the best, most reliable way, because sometimes that text can change, but that's the only thing we've been given. That's the only solution we have in this situation where none of the other information is unique. And this is a very real scenario. This happens all the time. I see it all the time. So in this case, XPath is our only option. So we say, find me the bold tag, and we're going to describe that bold tag. We say, well, it has text, and this is very important, the parentheses here. Text, open, close paren, equals what? Well, product. Again, don't try to fat finger it because sometimes people put extra spaces in here. Let's go ahead and copy it. Product 1. So please find the element that I asked for. Okay, I think we're looking good. Let's hover over it, and indeed, it found product 1. Right. So if that's our goal, is to find the price for product 1, we've just completed step 1. That is, find product 1. Well, now that we've got product 1, hit up, we need to build off of this. We know this gets us what we want. Now, what did I say? I said we needed to go up a couple levels, right, in the hierarchy. So just look at it this way. Where do I end up if I go up one level? I end up at the span. Can I get to the paragraph from the span? No, because they're on the same level. There's no way for me to tell it that. What I can do is go up again and then go down and describe again, describe what we're basically saying in long terms, and you'll see how this shakes out, is find me a bold product 1, go up to, and then go down and find your first paragraph and give me that. So that sounds complex, but hopefully it'll make sense as we move forward. So we're doing our detective work. Again, we found the bold. Let's go up a level and see where we're at. To go up a level in XPath, /... is how we do that. Well, I'm at the span. That's expected, right? Go up a level, boom, I'm at the span. So we need to get to the div, because if I try to go to a span that has a paragraph underneath it, well, there aren't any, right? And that makes sense because, again, at the same level of the span, there's no paragraph under that span. So there's no way for the hierarchy to get there. I said, well, let's go up 2 levels. How do we do that? Just repeat the exact same thing. /... We're at a div. Good. That's where we want it to be, right? So again, /... boom, span, /... boom, div. Now we say, all right, let's hop back down to the first paragraph under that div. Now I know this is a roundabout way, and I hope it's sticking with you. Watch it a couple times if it doesn't, but this is very important because there are situations where you need to be able to comfortably move around the hierarchy to get at what you need. Okay, so again, to read this, I know this is Greek, but how this shakes out is, find me a bold element. Let's describe that bold element with all of this bracketed stuff here. We're describing it by saying, find me the bold element that has text matching product 1, which is this. Then we're saying, but go up a level, right? Then go up another level and get me the paragraph that is under. And that directly correlates with start here at that product 1 bold element, go up a level, go up another level, and find me the paragraph that is right beneath that, which it is, right? This paragraph, it looks like it's at the same, it's underneath this div. So let's see if it works. And it did. What did we get? Well, we got the paragraph. Now, if we want to see if that paragraph actually has the information we want, I'm going to break into this. This is a list here. You see the brackets. It's a list of one item. We can see of index 0. So if I grab index 0 here by saying, well, bracket 0, that means give me the first index in the list. Well, there we go. That's what we wanted. Furthermore, And again, you don't have to remember this. This is just as you get more comfortable, you can use some of these methods. I say, give me the HTML that's in that element. And that shows you that if I were to dig down in here using this XPath in Python, I could absolutely get at that price. 100% of the time, it's going to find the product one, which is in this case what I wanted, and it will extract the price for that product. There's no way it could hop over to that other element and grab the wrong price. This, in the situation we're in here, this is the most reliable way of grabbing that price. So this is a lot to take in, right? But what I'm trying to get at is, in order for you to be able to problem solve effectively, and even if this doesn't make sense to you today, what you need to recall is that you can move up and down in this hierarchy here, this tree, using XPath, right? You can move downward easily in CSS Selector as well. We're not going to cover that today, but there's a way for you to move down the nodes using CSS Selector. I don't find it as readable. And in the case where we have to look via text, for example, product 1, product 2, XPath is really your only way to go. So what I want you to take from this is, you can find these elements in whatever way makes the most sense, whatever way is the most readable, whatever way is the most reliable, right? What is the least likely to change? The ID on this input hopefully is not going to change very often. That's a fairly reliable indicator. The ID on this button, probably the same thing. Now, the text of this, the problem with this scenario we had, where we found the price using the product bold element, well, that's actually fairly brittle. It was our only option in this case, but this is a fairly brittle locator, because what are the odds that that element is going to change? Well, let's break this down. What are the odds that the name is going to change? Could, right? Product names change all the time. Furthermore, what are the odds that they could unbold it at some point? It will no longer be under the bold tag. Well, pretty high, right? As styles change, maybe that product will not be bold next time. Maybe the structure will change. It will be under a different div. You see what I'm saying? This is a pretty brittle locator. So we need to be aware of that when we write it, because that's a good thing to go to a developer and say, hey, this is going to cost us time if I write this locator for you, and it breaks the moment that something changes. So I need more information. I need a unique ID, or I need something better to find this element. But the reality is that on the ground, sometimes it's all you have, and you at least need to have that toolkit to be able to move around this tree and do the detective work to find out how to get at what you need. I don't expect you to do that, right off the bat, right out of the gate, right now. I just wanted to expose you to it so that you can understand what some of the complexities are when you are automating from the front end. So, real quick, I want to prove to you that was a nice, worthwhile exercise, right, to prep for our Python automation. So when it comes time to actually automate on the Python side, we don't have to troubleshoot those locators. We know they're solid. We just tested them in the browser, right? That was the main portion, the main point of this exercise. So let's go ahead and make them work for their money, right? So we're going to navigate to that training ground again. And I'm going to assume it's going to get there. We'll find out in a moment. I want it to find that input using CSS Selector, and then I want it to find the button using the XPath locator. So let's go ahead and see if that works. There, that's enough. So the input one element is we're going to use that WebDriver. Find it by the CSS selector, and we don't have to pass the string anymore because we already did our homework, right? Let's go ahead and find the button while we're at it. Now remember, this one did not use CSS selector. Use this nice long variable name here. Now I'm going to work on faith here, that once this runs, it's going to find these okay, because again, I have confidence in the work that we did. And let's do something to those elements. So we're going to assign them there. Obviously, if we were writing an automated test case, we would do this in a much more readable way. We're just getting the concept across today. So let's manipulate them. We wanted to type into that input. So if you remember, the method to send text to an element is what? Send keys, right? Test text. Say that 3 times fast. And for button 4, let's just click it. It's a button. Buttons are meant to be clicked, right? And that's going to be it. So let's see what happens. What I expect is, I expect this element to have some text sent to it, and I expect this button to be clicked, at which point maybe an alert will come up or something. And I'm not going to worry about extracting the product today. I think we've beat that horse enough. So let's go ahead and see what happens. Now I like to do this via the terminal, because I think you should be used to using the command line. Okay, we see the browser opens up. Hey, we made it there. Ooh, that was quick. So, almost made it what we expected, right? We clicked button 4. That was exactly what we wanted to do. As far as input 1, input 1 element. So I messed up here. This was actually input 2. We can tell because not only did I name my variable input 2, but you can see in the locator here that I meant to do input 2. So that's a bug, right? Messed that one up. So this should say input 2, and then the universe should make sense. So let's go ahead and run it one more time. Behavior will be the same, right? So we see it, test text, and we clicked button 4. Is it starting to make sense, right? Are we starting to understand kind of the flow here? What I just showed you was use the browser, do all your homework there, find your locators in the browser. For CSS, again, by the way, we really should be good stewards of our WebDriver here and start quitting out of them when we're done. For now, I'll do it manually. Again, do your homework first here. It's much faster to mess around and get things wrong here than it is to keep running your Python program and just guessing, okay? So CSS selector, string or $$, right? XPath, $X, sorry. This is how you do your homework. That's how you find your element using CSS selector or XPath. Go ahead, once you have a locator that works, boom, pop it over into a variable in Python. Then you can go ahead and go about writing your automation and be confident that you're not going to have to waste a bunch of time running and changing, okay? Trust me, I spent about a year doing that. It's not fun. So that concludes this tutorial. Sorry, it was a little bit dry, a little bit long, but this is crucial stuff in order to be a competent automator, especially on the front end. You need to understand the DOM insofar as searching that hierarchy, finding those elements, and then being able to manipulate them in the browser, because once you're comfortable there, man, your automation is going to just fly, right, on the actual code side. So as we move forward, the next tutorial is going to cover actually writing a test case in Python using these skills that we've gathered up to this point. we're going to start extracting information from those elements and performing asserts against them or validating them, right? That would be an actual test case. So far what we've been doing is kind of moving around and clicking on things. We're going to write a test case, and that's going to show you what test automation actually looks like. We'll be working in the IDE over here. So you're going to see how to structure your code on a basic level. It's going to be a lot of fun. So again, I'm Brandon Blair with TechStep Academy. Really appreciate you taking the time.